Welcome to Commander Central, episode 236. And today, we're going to be talking about our homework cards from Zendikar Rising and what ones we'll be researching from Commander Legends. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Gentlemen, welcome back to the show for the last one that will air before Christmas. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good. Ready for the holidays and a nice long week of no work.
Nice.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm looking forward to taking it off too. I've got a project on Saturday from work I need to finish up Saturday night, and then a Sunday night, which would be last night by the time the show airs, we will have played our match for charity with the Scrap Trawlers. So that would have happened, and Max and I would have presumably won. So we'll just assume that we walked away from that victorious. That's just the logical place to go there. So hopefully we'll have some information on that next week, because we're going to give away one of the decks here to listeners, and one of them will have been auctioned off for charity as well. And then I think there's a rematch that will happen at some point down the road, so none of that will probably go out till like January or so. Is that right, Max?
Yeah, I believe we'll do a rematch stream sometime in January, so our decks will be mailed after that.
Sounds good. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Mine is all together and ready as much as it can be.
I can say this pretty much the same thing. I did get one test pilot out with it this week, and I can confirm there are 99 cards in the deck, and they all match my colors, commander's color identity. So hopefully, like you said, we'll be victorious. Nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Well, if you out there in listener land would like to reach out to us and tell us about the end of your year or any new decks you're brewing or basically anything at all, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com. You can find us on the YouTuber channel, where you can just search up CMDR Central. Go from there.
We are on both the YouTubers and the Faceboxes.
Yes.
Yep.
Facebook and YouTube for you guys who don't know the lingo, so.
Is that what the kids call them these days, Chris?
There's so many new terms that these kids have. I can't keep up with it. Like I was on Facebook earlier and someone said something and I'm like, what? It was like some 5 letters all together, like capital. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know what's going on here.
And the weird part about that is when you Google whatever that word or acronym is, the first hit is always Urban Dictionary. So it's like, okay, I guess I'm hip now.
Yep, I know it. You can also find us on patreon.com.
Yeah, head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers if you are so inclined to support us financially, such as the Decks You Play show, or just getting into our Slack to chat with us and all of the other listeners in there who are always up to playing some virtual EDH all the time.
Yes, any support we can get, we appreciate, even if it's just listening to the show and clicking that like button on whatever app you use to listen. Just the engagement matters a lot too. So thanks to everyone out there, no matter what you do. Listeners make this all possible, so we do appreciate it. So let's maybe jump into this main topic here and talk about homework cards. And in the past, there's been a couple ways we've used this term, both to talk about, hey, I want to test out this card. It's going to be a homework card. And we haven't done that really for a while. We've also had a plan to go back through and talk about cards like we had tested from previous sets that we had put in decks. And we kind of used this term for that as well. And we did it a few times, but we didn't really follow through like we intended. So this is one of the things I want to really do a better job of in 2021 is doing a revisit episode where we go back and look at each set, after a month or two and see what cards we've played from it and how they've played for us and how they've worked out. So it kind of logically makes sense to do both those two things in one episode, talk about the additions we're adding as well as the previous group of additions and how well they worked out. And it's just kind of, we got reminded by a listener, who was it, Max, that reached out and asked us about doing this again?
Andrew Cummings, writer
Andrew
for
Cummings,
EDH.
That's right. And at that point, I was like, yeah, we meant to do that, and I don't know why we stopped. So my goal is to try to do this for every single set in 2021 and look at the cards that we tried out and see how they worked out and kind of give some feedback. I think that's really a useful thing to see how cards actually played for people and how our expectations and hopes matched up with what they actually did. So first things first here, and this one is probably going to be kind of the roughest of the group because since we didn't necessarily plan it out for Zendikar Rising, our notes on what we tried might not be as complete as they should. or will be moving forward, but hopefully the future versions of this show we have a little more information, since we're going to kind of keep track of what the previous set's cards were. So why don't we start here with you, Max? Zendikar Rising, what cards did you put into decks? We'll do Zendikar Rising first before we jump into talking about stuff from Commander Legends that we actually added.
So this is interesting. As we were prepping for this show, I actually realized I did not put a single card from Zendikar Rising into any of my EDH decks.
Was that because nothing jumped out at you, or was it a situation where you just, like, at the time were kind of burnt out and just didn't really dig into the stuff from Zendikar Rising enough to want to put it in decks?
I think it's a handful of both. At the time, burnout, product overload hit me, so I really didn't pay a lot of attention to the set. Second, the attention I did show the set, for our review show and other things I did with it, nothing really caught my eye.
Sure.
That said, I do remember some of the original cards that I did want to try, and I had them in my lists on Archidect, and then they never really made that final cut, even without trying them out in actual gameplay.
Okay.
So one of the first ones is Angel of Destiny. I looked at this for Dramoka. So Angel of Destiny is a 5 mana, 3 white angel. It has a 2/6 body and it has flying and double strike. But it also says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 or more life than your starting life total, each player that Angel of Destiny attacked this turn loses the game. So I really like the lose the game design space Magic has kind of went the past couple years versus you win the game or everybody loses the game. The fact is that in a deck where I have all my flyers and quite a bit of them have lifelink, I think I would probably edge over that 15 or more life pretty quickly. But at the same time, it paints a huge target on my back, knowing that a couple swings with a few, 4-powered creatures can probably trigger this, and then I become arch enemy. And that's kind of where I decided not to run this card. It's
an interesting card because it kind of, particularly in a deck like Dramoka where you usually kill people one at a time, it does give you an opportunity to more easily kill 2 people at once, in that you can swing your bodies at one person, and hopefully deal a good amount of damage to them, maybe even taking them out, and then use the life gain off that to kill the one person you swung out with Angel of Destiny. So it does kind of make that a little bit easier, but I would also guess to most effectively use it, you would probably need a little more life gain and to tweak the deck a little bit more around it. And then is it worth making those kind of changes? I don't know if it is.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think it is. Maybe in the future, I might see it in someone else's deck and see it do something really cool, and I'll maybe try it out then, but right now it was just not something I was interested in actually making a cut for in the actual deck.
So what else did you have from Zendikar Rising that was close but you wound up not going with?
So my next one is Oblivion's Hunger. This is an instant for 1 and a black. It says target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn, and then you can draw a card if that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. This was meant for Regnan Krav, just because Krav always has +1/+1 counters on him. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got a copy of this card, Commander Legends previews had started, and Akroma's Will got previewed, and that is just better, in my opinion, for twice the amount of mana, but it gives all my stuff keywords indestructible. Right. And the fact that I have 2 commanders means it's twice as easy to trigger that choose both clause on Akroma's Will.
Yep. So how about, I see you have an entry here in the notes for Bala Ged Recovery.
I do.
And you said you did not put that in your deck at all?
No, I did not. So the 2 decks that I considered it for were Dramoka and Tuvasa. For Dramoka, I'm already running cards like Once in Future, which is an instant for 3 and a green, and it has the addendum clause. And I run Seasons Past, which is a 6-mana sorcery. Both of those cards let me get multiple things back. Once in Future puts 1 into my hand and 1 on top, or both in my hand if I spend 3 green on the card versus 3 generic and a green. Where Seasons Past is kind of a haymaker where I can cast it when I know I can get 2 cards back, 3 cards back, 4 cards back. And typically, Magical Christmas Land, Dramoka's out, so nobody can really counter it. The worst thing I have to really worry about is if you're going to crack a Scavenger Ground Stain in response.
Right.
So the fact that Bala Ged Recovery is a 3-mana regrowth doesn't make me that happy, because 3 mana to get 1 back at sorcery speed, I would rather just put regrowth back in the deck. Like, I cut Regrowth 4 once in future back during Throne of Eldraine.
Sure.
The other side of it being a green producing land that comes in tapped also doesn't really make me that happy because it comes in tapped. It's a huge tempo loss, especially if I'm in a position where I need green mana. I probably need it that turn to cast a Farseek or a Rampant Growth or 3 Visits. So, like, having that green source come in tapped might delay my game plan for 1-2 extra turns down throughout the game.
Okay.
The reasons I don't run in Tuvasa are pretty much the same. In Tuvasa, I'm running Replenish and Retether, which get multiple enchantments back out of my graveyard, and both of those cards can be game enders if cast at the appropriate time, because I probably already have Tuvasa out, and I'm just gonna hit someone in the face for 100,000 damage.
Okay. I did try some Balaged recoveries, and I will get into that here in a little bit. But Chris, did you get a chance to run anything from Zendikar Rising?
I haven't ran anything, but I definitely made swaps.
So what swaps did you make?
I put in Roiling Vortex and Mogus, along with the Lithoform engine, removing Light Up the Stage for Roiling Vortex, and I removed Mimic Vat for Lithoform engine. I went through my deck and actually looked at it, and I have... now that I removed Light Up the Stage, I had like 13 sources of card draw, and I thought maybe that was too much. So
you're like, I can afford to lose one.
And then Lithoform Engine is very similar to Mimic Vat, but it doesn't have the clause of I need something, to die, all that fun jazz. So plus I get to copy my stuff, so that's what I wanted.
Okay. Roiling Vortex is an enchantment. Beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to them.
Yep.
Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent, it deals 5 damage to that player, and you can spend a red to keep opponents from gaining life. So, like in Mogus, just dealing damage is useful, and opponents can't gain life is pretty useful there, but it also doesn't hit you. A lot of times those effects hit all players, and at least this lets you gain life if you need to.
Yeah, I'm coming up to the point now in that deck where I'm starting to get overloaded on effects like that, so if anything else gets printed going forward, it's probably going to have to start cutting, thinning those out, like which is the worst one, which is better.
Right. But you didn't get a chance to test any of this stuff,
no.
in part because of quarantine and stuff, and you just got a webcam in recently, and so a lot of these changes you've been making this year are changes to decks that you then don't get a chance to test, really.
Yeah. And most of the changes, like I haven't done anything that's like hyper aggressive or something, like this card could be good. It's more of this card just does the exact same thing that all my other cards do, so I know it's gonna be good in the deck.
Okay. How about your Alesha and Amanatu decks? Was there anything you made there?
Well, I looked at this really closely and actually did another deep dive today on this too. These decks are trash. They're horrible. Like, I looked at Alesha and I realized that I had detuned this so bad because of the meta that we had at the shop at the time and the influx of all the new players that I had been playing with. So I made it into more of like a friendly deck. Like, cool, look at this 3-color deck and I can do these weird shenanigans, but it's horrible.
Sure.
So it just needs to be rebuilt. Same with Amanatu. I built that on a whim with Max to copy your Jeru deck, and I have never modded it since. So it's still right there, and I want to rebuild it into the point where it's my deck, the way that I want it to play, that kind of stuff.
Sure. So do you have any plans for what you're going to do to it, or is that just like something over the next few weeks and months you're going to do something, you just don't know quite what yet?
Alesha is getting changed to a straight ETB value deck. It's going to be about tutoring up cards that have ETB come into play, reanimating them, that kind of stuff. Like, it's going to be a hardcore Mardu Reanimator ETB effect deck. No more tokens. I'm going to try to pull away from that because I want it to be something special.
Okay.
And then Amanatu is going to stay my Planeswalker combo deck, but it's getting tuned different. Like, I'm not going to only run, like 10 Planeswalkers and 3 creatures. No, it's going to get changed completely different.
Okay, cool. So you're going to, and you said you're going to kind of log this stuff a little bit more accurately for the next sets too, so we can kind of come back and look at it. And
I already
hopefully
have
this year
all set up. I have a big Word document all set up that I've been, keeping tabs on everything. And then going forward from Legends forward, I'll be keeping tabs on Alesha and Amanatu too.
Cool.
Awesome.
And hopefully this year, some of the stuff eventually is a little better than 2020 in terms of us getting chances to actually play some things too. So
yeah, I might try to get down to our store on Tuesday because I guess there's been a lot of newer young kids who have never been in the store before when we were playing that have been playing Commander. So I might try to jump in and get to know some people, try to, get the community back type of deal.
I mean, people are actually getting vaccinated now, and there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of being able to get back and play with people, even if we're not. It'd be nice to get Magic Fest and events like that back too, but at least locally being able to play, I think that's something that hopefully will be an option in the not too distant future. So
yeah, and the cool thing about Commander is you can follow all the protocols, the social distancing and everything. You don't have to be sitting on top of your opponent because it's a fun game. It's not like I need to know everything that you're doing at all times,
right, exactly.
And all that stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a good point as well. Okay, looking at some of my stuff. So I'll start with the Balagad Recovery because Max mentioned that. I think I've put that in 3 decks. These are always tricky. I still haven't entirely came down on where I stand on the MDFC cards.
Some are very, very good, though.
Some are very good. And so look at something like I was running Llanowar Reborn as a land in my +1 counters deck. That's a land that makes green mana when it comes into play tapped, but it has a +1 counter on it. You can move on to a thing.
Oh, it has graft,
So, okay,
right?
this land's always going to be a tempo hit, but I always get a +1 counter. So I kind of was, I want to compare Balagad Recovery to that. It always comes into play as a land. The problem is you don't always, if you come into play as a land, you don't get the regrowth side. So it's not like you're paying a cost in terms of the land coming into play to always get that +1 counter. The cost you're paying for the land coming into play is to have the option to use it as a 3-mana regrowth later in the game if you don't wind up using it as a land. So the question then winds up being, is it worth having that land come into play tapped the first 6 turns of the game or so when you draw to need to use it as a land versus having it as a regrowth during the later turns of the game? This is the one, at least for me, has been worth it every time.
Really?
If I have to play it as a land in the first 5 turns tapped, I don't love that. But the power it offers when you draw it on turn 8 and you don't need more lands because you have a draw engine going and you've got plenty of lands in hand and you draw it and now you can reuse whatever bomb spell is sitting in your graveyard, that power boost of having it not be a land on those later turns is worth the hit for me if I have to play it on a land on turn 3. The only thing I would say about these cards, and I've seen this happen, you have to be a little bit disciplined. You have to mentally tell yourself, if this is in my hand on the first 4 turns, I can't miss land drops on the hope that I draw a land next turn and can use this for a regrowth on turn 6. You have to resign yourself to the fact that you're going to play them as lands in the first 3 or 4 turns if you need to.
Okay.
So it does require some discipline in that regard.
Now, Valakut Awakening was a card that we discussed too at the time. Have you tried that one?
I have tried it. It's been fine. This one is unlike Balagad Recovery, where I feel like unless someone just dropped a Scavenger Grounds on you or something, there's almost always something in your graveyard worth getting back.
Okay.
And I think it's actually almost even better if you're not playing a graveyard deck, because if you're playing a deck that just doesn't do graveyard stuff for the most part, people aren't hitting unless they're Scavenging Grounds and grounding away all graveyards. Yep. They're not targeting you with a Paducah Bog. So you draw it on turn 7 and you're like, oh, there's even if it's just a Cultivate in your graveyard that you can get back to ramp yourself further, it's better than it being a land that you don't need. Let alone if there's a card in there that can, hey, I'm getting that Nefarious Protection back.
Yep.
Sometimes there's great stuff in there, but it's almost always worth having. Valakut Awakening, on the other hand, that's a wheel just for you. Put any number of cards on your hand at the bottom of your library, then draw that many +1.
Yes.
Stuff going into your graveyard is an advantage a lot of times on wheels, and this puts them on the bottom of your library. So unless you're playing Grenzo or something like that, isn't necessarily an advantage. It's been fine, and there's been enough turns when I've drawn it later in the game, and I'm like, okay, this is useful to have. There's also been enough times I've drawn it later in the game and been like, I'm happy with these 4 cards in my hand. I don't want to trade them for 5 random cards.
Yep.
So I think the problem here is way more often is it useful to grab 1 card from your graveyard, at least for me, than it is to do a small wheel. At least for me.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious about that because they're very similar cards, same casting costs.
Yeah.
They do different things, obviously, but they're both the MDFCs. So I was curious
Yep.
about your take on them because I saw that was another one on your list. So
The one thing I will note about it is because, and I ran it in my Adelaide's deck, and that's the deck where I never wanted it. I felt like.
Oh, really?
So it's yeah. Because that deck was really specific. Okay, I'm holding on to this damage doubler and this one thing, and I'm not using them just yet because I want to get in the right position. And then I draw Valakut Awakening. I'm like, I don't want to get rid of them. I'm holding on to them till the right point.
Okay.
Whereas my Mina and Den deck is the one where I have liked it. And also part of the thing with that deck is I get a bunch of really big creatures because of the way the land things work. I either get counters on them or they care about lands in play or whatever. So like oftentimes I'll have a 14/14 creature in play that then I sacrifice to Greater Good or to Momentous Fall or something. So that deck, fairly frequently I can wind up with like 15 cards in hand, at which point if you wield those with Valakut Awakening to get like 15 different ones,
yes,
it lets you really, really dig deep. So that's one thing I found with that one. Like Balagad Recovery didn't care about your deck too much. It was just always useful. Valakut Awakening really, at least for me, depended on the deck.
Yeah, I was really curious about that because reading the card, it sounds really good. And the more and more I look at it, I'm like, I don't really think I have a deck for this card.
Yes, I think that one is highly deck dependent for sure.
Do you, Dana, when you've ran Awakening, have you found it nice where, let's say you do put, 5 cards on the bottom of your library and you happen to draw a fetch land? Does that make it maybe better for you? Because I know that's always something when I play Seasons Past. If I have a fetch land in my graveyard, I grab that because then at least Seasons Past has a chance to get shuffled up into towards the top of my library versus being stuck on the bottom.
I don't know if I've paid attention to that. I can from now on. It probably also helps the fact that I said that the deck it's best in is Mina and Den, and that's a deck that has a bunch of fetch lands.
Right.
So maybe without realizing it, that's been the case with that deck. I'll kind of pay attention to it further, but maybe that also is one of the reasons I like it better in that deck as well. Could be.
Gotcha.
The other one I want to talk about here is Seagate Restoration that I tried. That's also the MDFC land, but it's the mythic one. It's the blue one. So you can either pay 3 life to have it come into play untapped, which is nice. And the flip side, if you cast it as a sorcery, is it's 8 mana and you draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1, and then you have no maximum hand size. So I know in CEDH, a lot of those players were really hyped for this and still are, because in that format, your life total tends to kind of not matter up until the point where you die.
Yep.
It's like so much combo happens and everything. Like no one's working you down 3 or 4 or 5 life at a time. For the most part, it does happen, but like usually you're dying in one big turn. Even in damage decks like Najeela or something, they're chaining combat steps together, or they're hitting you with so much stuff it just doesn't matter. So in that case, the 3 life is almost literally irrelevant. It's just going to be come into play untapped every time because they don't care about the life loss, and it gives you the option on the other side to draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. Even if it costs 7 mana late in the game or something, if you have nothing else going on, that's useful. For me so far, I don't think I've once drawn this at a point in the game when it was useful to me, and that could just be experience. I'm going to leave it in my Talran deck for a few more months and see how it plays out.
That's a lot of mana for that Talran deck, though.
That's a lot of mana, and a lot of times at that point in the game, too, when I've had it out, and if I'm behind or something, that's because I have 2 or 3 cards in hand, and like 8 mana to draw 2 or 3 cards feels terrible, even if I need it, I guess, versus doing something else. And if I've got a full grip of cards where I could draw a ton, I probably don't need to cast it. I have other things I can do to win the game without needing this. Yeah. So at least in the one deck where I've been running it, it either feels like it's a pain in the butt that's costing me 3 life just to not hit my tempo, or it's not that useful to me at the point in the game where I want to cast it as a sorcerer.
Now, have you contemplated this deck in your Sphinx deck, or this card in your Sphinx deck? Due to the simple fact that it is, the 7 mana, a lot of your cards cost, a bajillion mana in that deck anyways.
And there is a lot of ramp in that deck. Maybe I will try it there just to try it out. That's not a bad point. Because I'm still convinced it's not a bad card. I think I might have just had bad luck with it thus far.
Okay.
So maybe I will try it in that deck instead and move it from Talran over to that deck and see if I have any better luck with it. That's actually a good point.
Yep.
So this is what I'm going to keep trying, but I haven't had great luck with it so far. And the last one I will chime in on is Valakut Exploration.
Oh. I was reading that card because I saw that on your list, and I'm like, oh boy.
Whenever a land enters benefit under your control, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card as long as it remains exiled. So it's kind of got a outpost siege effect based on landfall. And at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with it, you may put them into your graveyard, and then it deals that much damage to each opponent. So number 1, the cards don't go away, unlike like outpost siege where they stay exiled. In this case, they go back to your graveyard where maybe you can reuse them, and they deal a little bit of damage to people. That's really nice. The beauty of this is I think it's It's pretty good, I think, probably in a lot of decks. But if you're playing some kind of a landfall deck, it's disgusting because plenty of times you'll, hit a land off of it. And if you're playing decks that can do multiple landfall triggers, well, hey, I hit a fetch land off it, which I will then use to play for my second land drop for the turn, and then which exiles a card onto it. And then I'll crack that fetch land and go to another land and put that into play. That's going to exile another card off it. And, one of the cards you hit was a Cultivate, and I'm going to cast that Cultivate, which is going to generate another Valakut Exploration trigger. Like, there are plenty of times I've had this generate like 3 or 4 triggers, basically 3 or 4 cards in a single turn. It's just so good. It's like a engine that powers itself almost.
Very similar to Experimental Frenzy. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So now, if you're playing like, maybe mono red or something, is it that amazing if you're only going to get 1 card off it every turn? I don't know. Maybe it's still good enough. But if you're in a deck that is running fetch lands and has ways to get multiple triggers, it's crazy good.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's narrow into what it does. Like if you're playing any sort of red-green stompy, of course you got ramp. It's probably worth it to put it in there because worst case scenario, you don't lose those cards. They go into your graveyard.
Right. But also, like, if you're playing a 5-color deck and you have 10 different fetch lands in it, as well as, a Prismatic Vista and a Fabled Passage maybe or something like that, in that case, it's still only a single red pip. You're still going to maybe be getting 2 or 3 cards a turn off it, even without doing landfall stuff, just by virtue of how many fetch lands you might be running in that kind of deck. Yep. So that kind of situation might be really good too. But this one has been just an absolute bomb. So
yeah, I like the ability to filter cards. That's really good.
Yeah, yes. And the last one I will talk about as quick as Feed the Swarm. Just because it isn't that exciting. It's the 1 in a black sorcery, destroy target creature enchantment, and you lose life equal to the permanent converted mana cost. I'm running it in my mono black deck, and I think I've seen it twice, and both times there's been a really good target, and I've lost 5 life and not cared. It's exactly what everyone thought it would be. A really useful card to run in mono black or Rakdos or Dimir where you can't deal with enchantments, and I would bet we'll eventually get a better version of it, just because that's how they kind of do these things, but for now, I've been happy with Feed the Swarm as well.
Yeah, it is, like you said, exactly what people thought it was going to be.
Yeah, nothing surprising there at all. So, okay, let's jump over to Commander Legends, and this is what we'll talk about, things we're going to try here and what we replaced and what the logic was there. And then this is the thing we'll kind of come back and try to revisit our thought processes, especially, and talk about like, this is what I thought was going to happen on the show, when we did it in December, and this is what the card wound up doing. So I think this is the thing that's going to be most useful, is kind of looking back on what our thought process was and how that found itself playing out. So I can start with you here, Max. What changes are you making from Commander Legends?
Okay, so I'm going to start with Brago, just because it's the first tab on my internet browser that's open.
Sure.
The main 2 changes I want to talk about today are Court of Grace, which is a 4-mana enchantment from the Court cycle from Commander Legends. This is the one where it ETBs, you become the Monarch like they all do, but then at my upkeep, I either create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, or if I'm the Monarch, I create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying instead. I actually removed War Priest Thune for this, which was a 2-mana creature that ETB'd and may destroy an artifact. Not an artifact, an enchantment. Okay. I kind of want to try Court of Grace over that just because I'm able to blink Court of Grace, so I can always kind of be the Monarch at the end of my turn at least. It's making me extra bodies, which I can leave up as blockers since they are tokens versus attacking with them. And I think it's just, the Monarch's a fun little mini game that, I like to play in EDH. So I'm just really interested to see how it's going to play out in a deck that's more control-based versus something like Dramoka or Tuvasa, where it's more attack-based.
Well, it also, isn't Brago very limited on the amount of creatures you have, too?
Yeah, I currently run 16 creatures in the deck, 17 counting Brago.
Yeah, and they're very focused on what they do, so having these extra little guys or whatever, that would actually be really beneficial to you.
Yeah, and you make a great point, Chris. A lot of the bodies are smaller bodies. They're 2/3s or 1/3s where, popping out 4/4 angels is going to kind of beef up my board state.
Yep.
And then the second card I want to talk about for Brago is Amphim Mutineer. I believe I talked about this a little bit last week. I took out Duplicant for this. The two big reasons was Amphim Mutineer is 2 mana less to cast, and Amphim Mutineer hits token creatures where Duplicant did not. So, if I have to deal with a Merit Lage or, a Helm of the Host copy of something, I can get rid of those token copies of threatening cards and try to help out the board or myself. And
right.
Unlike, I think it's Skyline Apparition, which gives them a token when it leaves the battlefield, giving my opponents a 3/4 salamander creature, I'm not too worried about, just because it's on the ground. I don't mind that, and maybe they aren't going to swing at me. I'm also really interested in trying to see what this does when I cast it for the Encore cost to get multiple copies of it.
What's the Encore cost on that one again?
4 blue. So it's 6 mana to cast it for Encore, but, it could it could exile 2 things or 3 things, depending on,
right,
how many copies I get off of it.
And you have not got a chance to get that out yet in a game, right?
No, unfortunately, Brago is one of my least played decks just because of the power level it sits at. So I tend not to pull that out on a random VEDH game. It's one of those where I really gotta be like, hey, is everybody okay with me playing at this power level? Do we have something to match it? If we don't worry about it. I'll play something different. So I hope to play Brago on the Lexicon stream tomorrow night on Tuesday.
Nice. Well, good luck, and if it performs for you, let us know.
Will do. Yeah.
So what else do you have here, Max?
So Dramoka, I think I'm just going to talk about Archon of Coronation. This is a 5/5 flyer for 4 white. It enters the battlefield, and I become the Monarch. Card draw is something that Dramoka either does very well or very terribly, just because of finding the draw spells in the deck. Can be good, can be not be good, So any extra incident of draw, I will take. And then it also says, as long as I'm the Monarch, damage doesn't cause me to lose life. So again, in a deck with a lot of lifelink, just padding that life total. So in most cases, you have to somehow deal with it or me, or have a commander damage total starting to rack up here to take me out of the game. And sometimes you get lucky and you sit down in a pod and you end up being down to the final 2 and you're against like a combo deck who probably can't have the ability to knock you down for 21 commander damage in a handful of turns.
Now, what were you removing for that one?
Let me look. So that one I removed Dramoka the Eternal. So this was the original Dramoka that had, whenever a dragon attacks, bolster 2. And the only other dragon in the deck is my commander, Dragon Lord Dramoka. So very rarely when I'm actually getting multiple bolster triggers. So it just felt like a good cut. Yeah, it's 1 more CMC, but it's as close as I can get to being equivalent. And this is probably just an overall better effect for the deck itself.
Yep, I was curious what you cut due to the simple fact that it is a 6 CMC card that you're adding. So... And I know how high CMC that deck seems to be, so I was wondering if you're going to have to add more ramp to it or something else. But no, the cut that you made was almost perfect.
3.57 CMC, it's fine.
Yeah, maybe for all your spells, and then your creatures cost like 12 mana each, and they're just like, bleh, bleh, bleh.
Yeah, that does happen every now and then.
So is that the only one for Dramoka?
That would be the only one that's worth talking about for Dramoka. I did put a handful of other things in, but it was more just 1 for 1, like 3 visits replace rampant growth, just slightly better cards.
Yep. Okay. Cards that we can actually get our hands on now and they don't cost you a fortune.
Right. So for my Psi Master Thopterus deck, this was mainly just lands. I put in War Room and Guildless Commons, and I just took out 2 snow-covered islands. I also put in a Sky Diamond, since I now have one, because those got reprinted.
What? And what? You don't have one?
Without putting on a scuba mask and diving into my bulk boxes, no, I'm going to assume I don't have one. When you crack one in like the first pack of Commander Legends, like, cool, I'll put that aside. So I just took out 3 islands and put those 3 cards in. The deck is very low to the ground in CMC and most of its artifacts, so I don't feel bad about removing a bunch of blue sources because I replaced one with a blue source and I have, enough other things in the deck that can make blue mana.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Last but not least, Regnan Krav. This was the deck that got tons of changes for me from Commander Legends to the point where I almost rebuilt the whole deck from top to bottom. A few notable changes. I put Command Beacon and Vault of Champions in. I removed Caves of Koilos for the Vault and a High Market for Command Beacon. I also put in Sengir the Dark Baron, and I removed Noxious Gear Hulk. The amount of things that die in this deck just by my own doing, I really hope I get to live the day when Sengir's out and I just start plopping tokens on him because I'm eating a bunch of stuff with Krav. I also added Sats's Will. That replaced Kaya's Guile. I don't know how long that's going to this change is going to stay just because Kyle's Gaia has been pretty clutch for me in the past, but I just really wanted to try out another Will card. And then I took out land tax and replaced that with Akroma's Will.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big jump. Oh.
It is. What I have been finding is I've added a couple more lands to the deck overall. I did that before Commander Legends. So my draws have been a little smoother to where land tax is great when I get it in turns 1 through 3, but at the same time, it's not worst case scenario if I don't draw it in my opening hand. So I just said, you know what, let's try it. Let's take it out and try something else.
Okay.
Akroma's Will, like I mentioned, I have 2 commanders, buffing up an army of tokens and giving them all, flying, double strike, lifelink, pretty much every keyword in the game. Seems really good. And I just really want to try that card out.
Okay.
Well, and you also, number one, you're in black, so you have access to plenty of draw. And number two, that deck, your commanders, the way they work, sacrificing creatures and stuff, you have plenty of draw as well. So it's not like you're short of cards in hand to provide you with land drops. You are probably hitting those pretty consistently just because you're drawing cards. You don't maybe need that land tax trigger like you would in some other color combinations too. So I can see that, even if it does seem strange to cut land tax from a deck.
Yeah. I have been noticing, though, land tax kind of seems to be falling out of favor. I haven't seen it in as many deck lists as I have before.
Yeah, I think that's probably partially for that reason. I think it is less good if you have a ton of draw. So yeah, no, I can kind of agree with that. I've considered it in my Sphinx deck does run it, but I've thought about it there before too, because for that same reason, I have plenty of cards in hand. It's nice those first couple turns of the game but even then it's almost always just extra. Like I still usually have the lands because I'm not keeping a bad hand, and I have some small draw in the deck so I can get over the top with ponders and brainstorms and stuff. So yeah, that would probably be a safe cut in that deck as well. I haven't cut it yet, but I get it. How about you, Chris? What do you have here for changes you're putting in?
All right, so we're just going to stick with Mogus because, like I said, I'm going to start login changes on Militia and Amanatu going forward from here. So for Mogus, I added Court of Ambition, which is the 4 mana enchantment in black. That is the court, become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. And if you're the monarch, instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. I took out Havoc Festival for this.
I was surprised to see Havoc Festival get cut.
It was a hard one, but the CMC overall for this is better, between 6 to 4. And this one forces, they either lose life or they discard cards. So, and Havoc Festival just puts a bullseye on me. Whenever I play it, it just like the whole table goes, and it's just, you're dead.
And people losing half their life for 3 turns or losing 6 life for 3 turns functionally probably winds up being pretty close anyway.
Yep. And the way I looked at it too is they both say, you lose life. So my damage doublers don't actually apply to that. So why not have one that, gives them the option to not lose the life, and they can if they discard a land, whatever, at least they're down, cards in their hand. The next one that I put in was War Room. Of course, got to put in the War Room. And after talking, I think it was last week, Dana, we were talking about this. I did remove Castle Lochthwain for it.
Okay.
Because Mogus is only 2 colors, so I'm only going to lose 2 life. They both cost 3 mana to activate, so I'm going to try it, see what happens. Worst case, I guess it doesn't work and I swap back, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the last one is Explosion of Riches. This card, I hope this works out the way I want it to. So Explosion of Riches is a 6 mana sorcery. It reads, draw a card, then each other player may draw a card. Whenever a card is drawn this way, Explosion of Riches deals 5 damage to target opponent chosen at random from among your opponents.
That's nuts.
I took out Toil and Trouble, which is a double-sided card from one of the Ravnica blocks where it is 3 mana in black to draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, and then 3 mana in red where an opponent loses life or takes damage equal to the number of cards in their hand. And I've noticed that a lot of times when I have that card in my hand, I'm trying to play it for the 6 mana anyways, play both sides.
Sure.
So why not just do this, guarantee me a card, and if I'm correct on the reading of this, it guarantees me 5 damage to someone at random, plus then my opponents can draw 2 if they want to and just be like, let's play the random game. Hopefully it doesn't hit me.
Right. And it does throw a lot of chaos. I mean, it does throw a lot of like a random chaos. Let's just see what happens. And that does make sense in this deck.
Yes. And it also hits with my damage doublers. So, I mean, if I have like 2 damage doublers out, that's 5, 10, 15 damage, something like that per card. And then your opponents are like, oh, do I risk it? Hopefully it just hits that guy and kills him off and we don't have to worry about him anymore. And I mean,
right.
I don't know. I hope this works. I don't think it's gonna, but it's worth a shot.
it's good to just try goofy cards like this too and just see how they play. And sometimes, even if they're maybe not the best option, they're fun.
Yes.
And that makes it worthwhile often enough too. So I get that.
Yeah, I know I got one more card in Mogus I want to swap out, and I haven't been able to find a good one for replacement. So anyone listening, if you can think of something, I do play Ruination in Mogus. I've been trying to get rid of it. So if you can find something that fits in the theme that you think looks awesome or something you guys want me to try or something, I'm more than willing to try it.
Have you thought about trying the, I know this isn't an exact, same effect, but isn't there that new destroy a land, draw a card from either, Ikoria or Zendikar? That's a sorcery for, 2 mana?
Yeah, well,
Because
the whole reason I played Ruination was because when I slopped it in the deck, a lot of people in our shop were getting really greedy with their mana bases.
True.
Non-basics everywhere, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to make them pay. But then, I never drew the card ever neither, so it's just kind of chilling in the deck, collecting dust pretty much.
Or you draw it in that game where 2 people are playing mono decks, and one's playing a 2-color deck, and they happen to have basics out anyway, so, then that feels bad,
and
too.
I'm the one with all the non-basics. I'm just like, this
right.
sucks.
Right. Yeah. No, totally. I get that. All right. We can jump over to mine here and look at a few of the changes I made. Actually, I should have asked. Is there any more from you, Chris?
No, there's not, Dana. Let's hear what you got.
All right. I'll start with the deck that was my Adelaide deck that is now Kedis and Crom. 2 wild changes I will mention that I put in this deck. Jessica, Thrice Reborn, is the Planeswalker. The main reason she's in the deck is for her 0 ability, which is choose target creature until your next turn. If that creature would deal combat damage to an opponent, it deals triple that damage instead. So combined with the fact that I have Kedis also in the command zone, that makes it so when my commander deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other player as well. Being able to, on a particular turn when Crom is out, drop Jessica for 3 mana, drop Kedis for 2 more mana, that's only 5. That's still assuming I have 1 more. Even if I just cast something say, Brute Force for 1 mana that gives target creature +3/+3, which makes Crom into a 7, which means when Crom hits one person dealing triple damage, that's 21. That's lethal commander damage right there. And it deals 21 to everyone else from Kedis. But even if Kedis isn't out, that still turns any giant growth on my commander into lethal commander damage.
That is disgusting.
So yes, it's just a perfect card for that deck, I think. I've only got it out once. It played well that one time I got it out, so I'm gonna see. But that is in that deck as what I'm testing out here, so I'll report back on that. The other one is Jessica's Will, which is the 3 mana sorcery.
So good.
Choose 1 if you control your commander, add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, and you can exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them this turn. If you control your commander, you can do both. Seems good, and I think we talked about it quite a bit when we reviewed it, but I've actually gotten to play this one a couple times as well, and it's been fantastic. I wanted replacing We Dragonauts. I had a couple of creatures in the deck when it was an Adelaide's deck that did similar things to Adelaide's, or when you cast an instant or sorcery, it gave them some kind of a buff.
Yep.
Not having Adelaide's in the deck anymore made them way less useful, and I just found I just didn't use the other creatures anyway. I was basically using my commander for damage, and they were supposed to be a backup plan in case my commander turned into, something that cost 12 mana to cast and I couldn't get it out or something. But I just found if the game got to that point and I let things get to that point, having a backup plan didn't really matter. I was just so far behind probably that it was irrelevant. So that was why I took that creature out for that one. And actually, I took another creature out for Jessica Thrice Reborn. I took out Amara Mystic, which did a similar thing. So those were my swaps I made there. In my Asperia deck, I put in 2 cards here as well. Sphinx of the Second Sun, which is the one that gives you the extra upkeep phase. Even if that, I don't have any way to abuse that in the deck really, but it's a, nice body Sphinx. So it's going to essentially give my stuff all vigilance and draw me an extra card. And there are a few things in the deck that do care about my upkeep step. But for the most part, it's like a Sphinx that lets me untap my stuff and draw an extra card. So I think that's good enough to replace Master of Winds. The other thing I put in was Chroma's Will for basically all the same reasons Max mentioned. It's just a really good card. It gives you the option to protect your stuff or blow stuff out. I replaced Brainstorm there.
Another 1 mana spell removed.
Yeah, which doesn't feel good. Yeah, that doesn't feel great. And the thing with Brainstorm is I only have, I think, 1 fetch land in the deck. There were just too many times where I would draw down the 3 and put those 2 lands back on top and then be stuck.
Yep.
Not that Brainstorm's a bad card, and maybe I could have replaced it with Ponder and or something and preferred that, but it just wasn't quite getting the job done. And at least in looking at the deck, that was like the first card that wasn't performing. I don't love moving from 1 to 4 CMC, but
yeah,
think it was the logical one to pull out. So,
well, the thing with Brainstorm is a lot of people, it is such a good card in Legacy. When you move into Commander, it is not as good as people think it is. I mean, I'd rather spend, 2 or 3 mana and guarantee me 3 or 4 cards compared to this where, yes, you're netting 3 cards, putting 2 back, but you could end up shafting yourself by putting the 2 back.
You lose out on so much of the stuff that makes it great in Legacy, where you're like where you're actively like hiding cards from someone's, him to Turok or something, or you're running a deck that has 8 to 10 fetch lands in it, so you can almost always shuffle away the cards you put back on top. There's just a lot of things that Brainstorm does in that format that it just doesn't do in Commander.
Yeah. And now I'm not taking away from CDH because I know it's a phenomenal card in CDH, but in your casual format, I don't think it's as great as people think it is.
No, I'm fully on board with that totally. So that was the thought process with that one. I put in Triumphant Reckoning in my Sigarda deck, and that wound up replacing Privileged Position.
I got to read what this card is. How can you trade that?
This is the 9 mana sorcery that returns all artifact, enchantment, and planeswalkers from your graveyard to the battlefield.
And you're okay with losing privileged position? Let's hear your theory on this. I need to hear this.
So Sigarda number 1 has hexproof.
Yes.
And Sigarda winds up being the primary source of damage. So while someone could destroy, one of the enchantments on Sigarda, and she usually has like more than 1 on her, they still can't hit her. I just found that Privileged Position only did half the work it does in, say, Max's Dromoka deck, where Dromoka doesn't have hexproof.
Yep.
And it was also Triumphant Reckoning costs 9 mana, so I'm like, what in this deck can I take out that costs at least 5 mana? I was trying to find something that cost a bunch, so it was also partially for that reason. It cost 5, and I'm like, and it has triple colored pips in it, so I'm like, well, it's the closest in rough CMC I can find as well.
Okay, now have you used this card yet?
I've not drawn it yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just really curious because I know Max didn't say anything about putting this in Tuvasa, I don't believe. I don't believe I heard anything about that, so...
That is correct.
Yeah, because I'm curious about that, because I know I've played your Sigarda deck, I've played against your Sigarda deck, and you have no artifacts in that deck. I don't know how many planeswalkers you have, so I'm just curious if it's actually worth it for 9 mana.
Just one planeswalker, the one that was in Theros, who I have not seen yet either.
Oh, no.
Cares about enchantments.
Calyx, whatever his Destiny
Calyx,
hand. Yeah.
Now, there is of course, there's 40 enchantments in the deck, so there's plenty of stuff to recur there. Yeah. This is one I'm not sold on. I was pretty positive Jessica's Will was going to be a really good card, and it wound up being a really good card. This, I don't know. I agree with you, Chris. It might be a thing where, I bring back 2 enchantments every time, and that's not worth 8 mana. When I could just run Balged Recovery.
Yeah, that was the other thing. I'm like, Balged Recovery's there.
Yeah. So, which I do have in that deck, actually, with that in the deck too. This one I am not sold on, but so this very much is a homework card in that I need to test it out to see how I.
Another idea for you with this then too is, are you running the White Court then?
Not in. Well, I said that, but I did put it in a couple decks. I don't remember if it was in this one.
Because it is an enchantment. It would fit your theme.
I did put the White Court in. I want to put it in my wife's
Angel deck.
Janara Angel deck.
Okay.
But I did not put it in this deck. I think I thought about it, but just wound up not using it. And actually, that's one that might actually be quite good in here, so maybe I should reconsider that.
The chances of someone getting the Monarch off of you usually is slim, because Sigarda's got Vigilance and all that. So, I mean, you have a good blocker. I mean,
yeah,
unless they come in with 12 creatures or something. But, I mean, just spitting out 4/4 Angels, I mean, even 1/1s that you can suit up if you're in a tight spot.
Now, I did put the court in my Jeru deck.
Oh, of course you put it in Jeru. Jeru needs all the help he can get.
Yep. And in the thought process there was also, even if it's just making spirits, any blocker that can get in the way and protect planeswalkers is pretty useful. And it's white, card draw is always useful there too. So I did put it in there. Have not drawn it yet. So we'll see. That also got a Triumphant Reckoning because it brings back planeswalkers.
That one I can see in Jeru. Because, I mean, you're running,
I think it might be better in Jeru than it is in Sigarda. So... And I wound up taking out Brazri Ket. Just didn't do enough for what the deck wanted. To put a +1 counter on up to 1 target creature for a +1 that just isn't that impactful. His ult is good, but it's not even that amazing. So I did get Bazir Ket out one time, and it didn't feel strong at all. So I felt like Triumphant Reckoning possibly bringing back multiple Planeswalkers was worth the try there.
I also noticed in your notes you did not discuss what you put in Kresh, and I was extremely curious about why you put that in and removed what you did.
Why I put a Nightshade Harvester?
Yeah, over a Chromatic Lantern?
So what I found there is just because we've got so many good dual land cycles and stuff the last few years, Chromatic Lantern has become less useful in that deck. That might not be the case for every 3-color deck, but like in this case, I have the 3 ABUR duals.
Oh, yeah.
I have the 3 on-color fetch lands. We've gotten Fabled Passage. We've gotten Prismatic Vista, between lands that make 3 colors and things like Ash Barrens. I've just found like I don't have a problem hitting my colors in that deck.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that because it is technically you're cutting out a ramp card too, so I don't know how bad that hurts.
And the thought process there was I added a 3 visits in that deck.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So I added 1 ramp and took one out, so that kind of wound up being a wash. Okay. I didn't put them as a replacement for one another, but we stayed even on ramp in that deck. And Nightshade Harvester, for those who don't remember, is 3 and a black, and whenever an opponent plays a land, you put a +1 counter on it and they take a point of damage. So the deck is a +1 counter deck, and it's nice to have things that get counters
just randomly
that don't require. Yeah, that don't require you to pay X mana for one, because I don't want to tap out in that deck. And number 2, occasionally there's going to be somebody I'm going to totally bone because they're like, oh, I was going to cast Scape Shift, and now I'm going to take 9 damage from Scape Shift if I try to do something like that. Or I'm going to, even a Sky Shroud Claim, punishing people for that kind of thing with a little bit of damage is useful. I don't know if it's good enough, actually, but this is also very much a homework card because I don't know if it's going to make the cut or stick around long, but I'm going to test it at least.
So one final question for you, Dana, then.
Yeah.
Looking at our notes on here, your, bread and butter deck, the deck that, we talk about all the time, Vela, I see no additions.
I didn't note them down, but I did make 2.
Okay.
One that's not interesting. War Room I put in the deck.
I think War Room should go in every deck, honestly.
War Room I can actually speak about because I did put it in every deck. Or not every deck, but like enough of my decks. I've actually seen it probably 4 or 5 times, and it has been really good every single time.
Oh, I believe it.
So I can speak some experience on that. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, down the road, but I'm very confident that I'm happy with War Room. The one change I made to my Vela deck was I put in Phyrexian Triniform.
Yay!
That's the 9-mana golem that's a 9/9, and when it dies, create 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens, and then it has Encore 12.
Oh, jeez. Oh, my gosh.
So the thought process there was if I'm at that point in the game later on when I have Vela out, and hopefully I have an altar of some sort out, spend 9 mana to drop Phyrexian Triniform, and then sacrifice it to an altar, which will deal, 1 point of damage because a creature left play, making me 2 mana, and then making me 3 golems, which I can then all sacrifice to the altar, making me another, 6 mana, dealing 3 more damage to everybody, and with the mana in the mana pool, then perhaps recast Phyrexian Triniform for the Encore cost. Which is going to make multiple copies of it because it's for each opponent, all of which I can sacrifice to make all the tokens to sacrifice for mana. Right. So if I'm at a point in the game, yes. So if I'm at a point in the game where I can cast it and have Vela out and happen to have an altar out, I can crank out, 20 damage with it relatively easily.
Yeah, super gross.
So that is And it's just a neat card in general. I mean, I think 9 mana is a lot, but whatever. I thought it was a fun one to play as well, and technically could wind up being a win condition if certain conditions are all simultaneously met. So,
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So those are the main changes here that I thought were worth talking about. I made a few other ones. Like I said, I put War Room in a bunch of decks. I put the other half of the Battle Bond lands that we got in decks that needed those, but we know those are good. There's not much to evaluate there. So, all right. I think that covers enough that's worth covering here. It gives us plenty to look at and come back and talk about maybe in February or so once we've decided what we're going to add to our decks from Kaldheim, and we can hopefully have
that's starting
got
to
a
look
few
good.
cycles in with these cards.
It's starting to look good.
I mean, we've already got one of the gods spoiled and a few other things, so the hype is already building back up.
No, there's a few cards from there that I've already seen that I'm like,
You're already ready to go. I've already got a few I've already marked down. I'm like, okay, that'll go in this deck. So we've already started the process. All right. Everyone, have a wonderful Christmas, both to my co-hosts and to our editor, Rafael Garcia, who you can find on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And to all our listeners, all our patron supporters, everyone out there, enjoy your holiday weekend, and thanks for making it a fantastic year. We'll be back next week where we're going to talk about our choices for cards of the year, the Rifties.
woo!
Woohoo!
I
might wear pants for that, guys.
All right, fancy. Max is going all out. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod. And we will be back next week. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.